It's the 18th of August 2022. Looks like I'm a minute late tonight. That's unusual. Hope everybody's doing good on this Thursday. We're going to just dive right into it. We have absurd amount of material to close, to cover. We'll get right at it. It always takes a minute about to get set up, right? It's a lot of work. It usually takes 4 people to work this equipment. We're just going to dive right in. So it's pretty hard to wrap your mind around. Now, this was the remains of Reactor 3. It was a 190-foot building in Fukushima Prefecture. It's known as the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. So they built a contraption and then claimed they were actually in the contraption and everything was normal on top of a building that don't exist, and they being your media worldwide. Now, they've done the same thing for Reactor 4, where they're pretending they're in a building that actually doesn't exist. So that's a pretty risky thing to do, right? Let me just play that clip, because we're going to dive right in.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be Reactor Building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
And
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be Reactor.
And we have a poll tonight. I'll explain that to you in a moment. And so, thank you, everybody. You got to put refresh by the sounds of things. Wow. And we're a minute late, a minute and a half or something late, which is... I got everybody spoiled because I'm never early, never late. And if I'm a minute late, nobody knows what to do anymore. That's pretty awesome. That's a pretty good problem to have. So you have 2 buildings that are completely leveled, and the media keeps insisting that there's no issue, that they're actually intact, right? That's Reactor 3 and Reactor 4, where they're claiming buildings are perfect. Now, what happened to the buildings were they blew up and they atomized and aerosoled. They also caused a chain reaction. What that means is it creates a constant plume. This is a model of Francis. So we had radioactive fallout. This model is 16 days. You have radioactive fallout covering the planet in just 16 days. And so there a lot of reports saying deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. Mass extinction around the world. Because the power plants broke. So to the average person, right, it's very confusing, obviously, right? And this was Noah's model of the radioactive fallout from Japan. Unfortunately, it happened. Japan Times column, as the public, possibly worldwide, sickens over time, the truth will come out about Fukushima. So that's an incredible statement. You can't just make all the humans sick worldwide without making all the animals, which are much more vulnerable, sick also. So we launched research expeditions year after year, from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska and everywhere in between. And in that, there's 27,000 islands. There's 3 million rocks under the surface of the ocean. It's a very, very dangerous environment. And so we launched the research expeditions. year after year. I'll show you a sample of that. And it wasn't typically nice weather. It was typically terrible weather. And here's what we found, long short, was that to your left is what it looked like in 2010, 2011. After Fukushima radioactive fallout, what we discovered was the species were missing, and the ocean didn't recede the coastline, which is the nursery of the, in particular, this is the Pacific Ocean, but as you've seen, radioactive fallout was symmetrical worldwide. And so what I done was went back year after year hoping the ocean would recover. My pictures are to the right. They're the same places as the pictures to the left. And so you see these big wide shots, hopefully. What that meant to show you is that you can fill the beach up with people, but you're not going to find the species that are missing. They were actually exterminated. And that's why they lied about Reactor 3 and 4. There was 2 more reactors confirmed to have meltdown. And they had decades of reactor cores. These reactors are 720 tons each, whereas Chernobyl was a 200-ton reactor. And they had decades of reactor cores. And so what I've been doing was, hopefully I was wrong. We had to go out and do the research year after year. And the species to your left are now permanently exterminated. You will never take those pictures again. And you were warned, by the way. And so you can see an incredible, beautiful, wonderful, just unimaginable diversity. Up to 7,000 plus species, highly visible species in the tides, which is the nursery of the Pacific Ocean. This is actually a typical day on the research expeditions. And this was the end of the typical day of the research expeditions. It's just miserable. And so what we discovered was Fukushima was actually, had wiped out the species. The nuclear industry is extremely powerful industry. The cover-up was well established at this stage. And all we can do is document what had happened in the hopes that that would make a difference for the planet. The truth, that is, the facts, right? Unfortunately, the cover-up is still ongoing. What I'm going to show you tonight as headlines. First, I'm just going to introduce you to some of the die-offs over the last number of years so you can kind of wrap your mind around the bigger picture before we get into the recent headlines from this year. And we have headlines that didn't cover, which are very important, from November last year, coinciding to current, right? But we'll start off with the current headlines after I introduce you to the recent history. 70 emaciated gray whales, 70. So that's quite the statement when you talk about 70 at a time emaciated gray whales, because the food chain is broken. By the way, did you know bowhead whales can live for 268 years? How can we destroy something like that? Thousands of whales are dying, and scientists have run out of public beaches for the carcasses to rot. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. This was 2019. Scientists are worried that 1,000 gray whales have died so far this year. So generally you're going to find about 10%. So when I showed you 70 emaciated gray whales earlier, it meant there was around 700 emaciated gray whales. The rest of them we didn't find. They didn't wash up on our public beaches. Southwest bird die-off caused by long-term starvation. This is 2020. This was insect-eating birds. It was 190 species. And there was a good cover-up that went with that. But we flushed it out over a week of steady headlines, 2 weeks probably of steady headlines. And finally, the truth came out right away that they were emaciated. They had... Scientists arrived at the starvations most likely caused the death of the majority of the birds. Depleted fat deposits, empty stomachs, small amount of blood, kidney failure, shrunken flying muscles, irritated lung tissue. Unprecedented mass death of seabirds in the western U.S. baffles experts because they won't acknowledge Fukushima could be part of the equation. The Cassini auklets was over 1 million of them had showed up emaciated. And there was roughly around 1 million to 3.5 million of the Cassini auklets as a population. And they've never seen anything like it. He's been working at this since 85. There was Cassini auklets like this one were swimming near Santa Cruz Wharf. They numbered between 1 million and 3.5 million along the west coast. It was like an evacuation from a major city where all the birds were showing up at the one time and emaciated. On some beaches, Cassini auklet death toll was 100 times greater than any bird die-off ever tallied there. It's 6 times worse per kilometer than the Exxon Valdez in 1989. Most of them were different states of decay, which means they had died at different times. And there was nothing feeding on them, by the way. And every now and then we see tracks coming out of the water, fresh ones. And you would find the Cassini auklets clinging to life, just skin and bones. AKA, they had starved to death. The U.S. Geological Survey, others performed necropsies, animal autopsies, on several of the emaciated Cassini auklets, and they found no evidence of diseases or trauma, no viruses or bacterias, no feathers covered with spilled oil. The birds simply appeared to have starved to death. And this was uniform over quite a few years. We have seen this. This was a major die-off. Also, there was, at the same time, a major die-off of the common murres. Common murres can dive 600 feet all day long, and they feed on anchovies and squid and sardines and capelin and everything else, 8-9 inches long, basically. Krill, which is like a big, not all the time, but most species are migratory, are the big, fairly big, like big shrimp. We are in the midst of perhaps the largest murre die-off ever recorded. And on a freshwater beach, they had found 8,000. And these birds don't go near freshwater. Everything was emaciated. It lasted a very long time. And so within a year of that, all of the rookeries were empty after, and even now. And they found them in inland places as far as Fairbanks, hundreds of miles from the coastline, which is extraordinary. And you've seen the pictures I showed you at the beginning. Normally the birds, if they can't find a normal migratory species, they would just go into the coastline and feast, right? But as I showed you, the coastline was stripped, right, at the beginning. I showed you from my research expeditions. It's extremely important to realize the birds didn't have an alternative. This is why they're showing up emaciated. And they also, at the same time, they were seeing whales and sea lions in California, widespread deaths of other marine mammals. It was a very long-lasting, the immediate cause of the bird's death was starvation. There's simply no food. They were emaciated because there was no food. 2016, 2021 humpback whale unusual mortality event in the Atlantic Ocean. because we were talking about the Pacific. Now we're talking about the Atlantic. 2017-21 North Atlantic right whale unusual mortality events. West Coast gray whale stranding declared an unusual mortality event 2019-2021. But they had others previous to this, right? Manatees now under unusual mortality event. 30 whales found dead in Alaska as part of an unusual mortality event. They don't know what's going on. Well, they had all starved to death. That's the one thing everything has in common. 14 humpback whales, 11 fin whales, gray whale found stranded on the islands in Alaska's western Gulf. They turned out all to be emaciated. Another adult southern resident killer whale. The killer whales have been emaciated since 2013. Alaska seabird continues for another summer. That was actually year 5 in a row for Alaska. Emaciated and starved to death. And this was all kinds of species, right? The storm petrels, which we have the biggest population right here. And I installed last night an idler control valve that wasn't the right one, but fit, kind of. And I started it up today because it was dark when I finished last night. And it doesn't idle. It barely starts up, and you have to throw the throttle up, and you can't put it in gear when the throttle's up, so you can't utilize it that way either, right? So I got to put the old idler control valve back on, which only gives me limited speed, 3,000 RPM. And we're going to have to order in the proper one. And so, goodbye, power washer. And these things are $384 shipping and importation fees included in taxes. I'll show you that coming up later. We haven't been really noticing any salmon up here. I might as well show it to you now. What's the big difference? Show you then. I might forget later. That's the one right there. And $78 to ship it in. Nasty dogs. For a stupid idler control valve. So the order is going to be $383 for that little stupid valve. That's what I'm going to have to pay. Burn, man. So when the money goes back in my card from the because we raised $200 in the last couple of days, right? And so which means that there's $230 or something coming back on my card, because that's the prepaid card I use on Amazon, which means I'm going to add the rest of the money I got onto that, order that in, because it's going to be September the 6th before that shows up. But if I go to the dealership, it's 6 weeks instead of 3 weeks. So we still can salvage the research expedition this year for a month, and we can do a lot in a month because we're motivated. So also think about how this cover story has been working anyway. They're trying to say the bears are getting skinnier and skinnier. Well, they're actually emaciated. So 5 million salmon in one river that didn't show up, only 600,000. They say the grizzlies are bearing the brunt of it. But the grizzlies, actually 95% of their diet is grubs and roots and berries and stuff, not salmon. So the bears can eat something else, right? The problem with the berries is they bioaccumulate a lot of radiation. And bears will eat 200,000 at a time, berries, right? So they're bioaccumulating a huge amount of radiation, so they end up with leukemia. And end up, there's food there, but they can't uptake the nutrition. Mysterious mass deaths of Alaska birds baffle scientists. Tens of thousands. It was about 1.4 million washed up at that time, the common mers. Had starved to death. Not appeared, but actually starved to death. Appeared emaciated or emaciated. We know they're starving because their stomachs are empty. But they call it appeared emaciated when it was a well-established fact. Alaska adds krill and mussels to the list of unusual marine deaths, along many, many others. Now, how radiation works is people think the ocean disperses it. The Bikini Atoll is over 1 million square kilometers. It's over 1 million square kilometers. It's too radioactive to live in. That was a 2019 study. Let me bring that up because we got so much to get through. I won't be able to do it typically. We're just going to bulldoze our way through, because we got around 1,300. A lot of that is pictures, but 1,300 clicks to get to, and we're going to start that right away. So this was a study in 2019, July the 15th. Radioactive fallout from the testing contaminated a huge swath of land and oceans extending over 1 million square kilometers. 1 million square kilometers from radioactive fallout. That's recent studies. So it contaminates the ocean for very long times. And Fukushima was a major event. And all the media ran with this particular story last year. Plastic shower hose pulled from a dead dolphin's stomach. And this is the hose. This is a 2-foot hose. Dolphins don't eat that. You can't swallow that. Somebody found a dolphin on the beach and actually stuffed that in its throat. And it's despicable that the media ran with it. Because if they had to talk to any marine biologist, they would have told it was impossible for the dolphins to eat a 2-foot hose with a tap on it. And then if we go back and look at the mass die-off in New Zealand, whales won't stop killing themselves in New Zealand. There's all kinds of mass die-offs, 145 in one, 90 in another at the same time on another part of the beach. The entire coastline in New Zealand was seeing mass die-offs. 400 whales beached themselves in one time. Another time there was 200 whales. Another time was 600 whales. And then we also, like, it's not just, as I showed you earlier, it's not just pilot whales. It's all the different species of whales. 10 sperm whales. This is unprecedented pre-Fukushima. All of it. None of it existed pre-Fukushima. So let's run head first into the circle of the cycle that we got. Hi everybody. Hope everybody's doing reasonably good if that's possible. We just anybody can call, 709-589-4406. 709, somebody might put that in the comments section. 709-589-4406 if somebody want to call in. You're more than welcome to. Let's get after it. Now, before I do that, let's give Kevin Blanche a quick call, because Kevin has been down walking the coastlines of California, and the species are missing, of course, down there. He's been doing it year after year and posting the videos up at his site. Let's just hopefully grab Kevin and bring him in for a minute. And he can... Hopefully Kevin is available.
Hello?
Hey, Kevin, you got 5 minutes on your hand there?
Yeah.
I'm just covering the die-offs over the last number of months, and I've shown the expeditions I was on, but I wanted the people to hear you, because you've done California, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kevin. So Kevin Blanche, folks, had... went along the coastline of California and other places, and that were closed for the last couple of years. And Kevin, you found no species, I think you were saying?
Well, Point Loma is the most famous tide pool in all of Southern California. It's been closed for 2.5 years. So I wanted to get down there. The first full moon cycle we had the full moon was early, and they don't open until 9:30. So the second full moon cycle was that July juniper moon, and I got down there, and so I was the first footage shot, and so we got in there, first people in there at low tide in 2.5 years. And I've been in that tide pool my whole life, and I've been documenting it post Fukushima. I've never seen it so dead, and I mean, it even startled me how freaking dead it was, and I mean, even no CNN. I mean,
Nothing. And so if you shipwrecked on that coast, there was no communities there, you would starve to death, basically.
Yeah, well, you know, it's so famous for its tide pools right there, and, you know, the Upper California purple urchins, which they burrow into the rock, those little pads and holes you see, those are, you know, the urchins.
Right, that's right,
lived
yeah.
there forever. And they went a long time ago, but, yeah, the lower pool, you still see some sickly sea anemones up to a couple years ago. But like I said, everybody's been talking. It's one of the major tourist attractions of California, the tide pools at Point Loma. It costs $20 to get in. And
there's
so
nothing
I wanted
there.
to get out there, and I got up there, and I never seen anything so, I mean, it even startled me.
And you even talked to some of the people that worked there, and they admitted that it was dead as a doornail.
So finally, you know, the rangers all know me there for all my Fukushima work, and even before. I've been on these tide pools for decades. So the one ranger who wouldn't even talk to me, you know, who thought I was Fukushima mad, he walks up to me, and he says, "Blanche, come here." I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And he says, "Well, you know, what about Fukushima?" I says, "Oh, you said the F word." I thought I was crazy. He says, "No, you ain't crazy." He says, "I was wrong about that." He says, "I understand now it's 3 full meltdowns, and, you know, you were right the whole time." And he sit there, he brought it up to me. And then there was a little Hispanic chick that's worked there for about, well, I'm not supposed to say chick these days. Anyway, young lady who's worked there for about 5-6 years. And you know, you could tell the type, you know, she's tattooed up and all, you know how I communicate with those
that's
people.
right,
You know you're going to get the truth from them. You're going to get the truth from them. They ain't going to bullshit you. And she's just, you know, low level like me, a grunt, a peasant. And she worked there. She says, "I've been working here for 5 years." And I says, "Well, you've been here since the day it reopened?" "Yeah, every single day." I said, "How many tourists in here?" "Thousands and thousands." I says, "Well, you're here every day in these pools. Tell me what you saw." She says, "Nothing. It's so wiped out." I says, "You're telling me you haven't even seen one sea anemone, one sea urchin?" "I'm not, nothing." She says, "I'm here to tell you, it's wipeout."
Yeah.
I'm like, and then of course I worked up the other pools. You know, my videos aren't as stark, you know, this time, but because it was pretty dark. But I got a great look. I've never seen the pools at PB Point, which is really the best tide pool in Southern California. It's not Point Loma, and I've always known that. And the ocean got so perfect, you know, because, you know, it's not about just the moon, it's about inner and outer tide flow. We got like the perfect tide flow. And it pulled out and he left these giant swimming pool style pools, tide pools. Pulled out perfect, the flow was perfect. And I got out there and you could see good enough, you know. I mean, I never seen such perfect tide pools in my life that, you know, she left the ocean and nothing. I mean, remember when I used to find right there, I'd find the big, I'd find the sea or the hares, the California hare.
Right,
You know what
that's
a
right.
California hare is?
Yeah,
The great big giant slugs.
that's right. With the hair all over them, yeah.
Well, there's no hair on them, they're just black. They call them California hares because they got 2 little things on their head, almost like a rabbit. So the hare's H-A-R-E, like a rabbit.
Okay.
And so they're pretty rare, but I found down there, right up there at PB Point, what's his name at the Marine Biology Department, Steve, at the Monterey Aquarium, said that the video I got is the most of them he's ever seen ever in the history of California, and it was my videos. But I used to find those post-Fukushima.
And Kevin...
And the reason is because, go ahead.
And you were going to say the reason is, go ahead, Kevin, finish your thought.
Well, the reason is because there's a sewer issue there. They've been having a bad sewer issue there. And so the leakage in those hairs will actually feed on the soil. But that's the only thing I've been finding. But the last several times, I don't even find those. I don't even find those. I mean,
and you've got
it's just
some.
a wipeout.
You've been given some updates on salmon runs. They're missing.
So the salmon numbers, I've been documenting that heavily. And so, they'll report the Columbia, and they put the gill netting on the Columbia, and they stop most of the fishing. So there are, the numbers, we got 250,000 on the Columbia, but you got to realize that's with no gill netting, no fish, so it's a horrific number. But
yeah.
We keep track of the Deschutes and the Rogue and, the Willamette, all of them. And the Jedediah Smith. Jedediah Smith has no dams. And so, and the Deschutes, I've got Tim Martin boots on the ground. He's the famous salmon guy there.
Yeah.
The Horn River right there, over Shear Falls, that's on the Deschutes. Have your audience let's have one of your polls. Take a guess how many are over the Shear Falls and they opened fishing 3 days ago. One.
Wow.
One.
Only made it up.
One.
Made it up to shoots.
One over the Shear Falls and one.
So that's a collapse.
Oh my God.
That's a collapse, right? Yeah.
That's on the verge of extinction.
Yeah.
And so the rope right now on a normal year right now would be, typically you go back before Fukushima would be, we'd be pushing between 200,000 and 500,000. Last I checked, there was 58. That was 2 days ago.
Dismal.
58.
That's dismal.
Oh, I mean,
that's not enough for. That's not even enough for a typical bear or something, right?
And we have Endangered Species Act through the feds. There's 3 administrations that are in violation, and Oregon has an Endangered Species Act. But we rely on Greenpeace and Sierra Club and Friends of the Earth, people like that, to file suit against the feds when they don't do the right thing. But we've shown since post-Fukushima who they are. And so nobody's filed suit. So they're actually open fishing on a river that has one fish. And by the way, we count them all. The sonar that's in the front of those rivers at the mouths, it doesn't miss a fish.
Yeah, the sports fishing lobbying for the equipment, they have a big lobbying organization. They're very powerful, eh? And so...
Well, not only that, we have what we call the Mitchell Act, was passed in 1932, which is money to restore the fisheries of Oregon. It's a giant bill with a lot of money that flows into it. In the 1990s, in the late 90s, it got lobbied, and the Chamber of Commerce took it over instead of, the environmental syndicates. So the Chamber of Commerce, so of course they're going to, like I said, the lobby to sell boats.
They're crazies, eh? The Chambers of Commerce, they're insane. Okay, listen, I'm going to let you go because I got around 1,300 clicks to get through. And
you were late last night. I watched it last night. So,
yeah,
a lot of good stuff, and what's going on in Ukraine's a big story right now, too. So.
Is it ever, hey, boy? Okay, my friend.
Oh, boy. All right. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Kevin. Right. Yeah, okay, bye-bye now. That was Kevin Blanche. You can find Kevin on YouTube, and you can link up to him from there. And he's posts regularly. He also walks the coastline whenever he can. Let's keep her rolling here. So, young whale washed ashore, probably died of starvation. Humpback whale washed up on the beaches, was severely underweight. That's the story constantly. A group scrambles to bring 30-ton dead humpback whale ashore in Halifax. And so there was a lot of humpbacks about 2 weeks ago in a single week period, and I was just kind of documenting them. Very thin, indicating thin is, whenever you hear the word thin or malnourished, that's emaciated. They starve to death. They go from 12 inches of blubber down to 2, and that's when we find them. Dead humpback whale washes up near California. Fish and Wildlife were down investigating it. San Luis County. Cape Cod, gory shark footage season has arrived in Cape Cod. Feeding on the carcass of a dead humpback whale. So I was finding every day several different recent die-offs of humpback whales in different areas. Some of them had already been dead for a while. The majority of them were still alive when they washed up. Humpback whale found after this was in Norway, I think it was. Iceland. He's never been aware of whales drifting ashore in those parts before. Capelin is drawing humpback whales closer to shore. That was down here where I'm to, by the way. But there was nothing normal about this. This time of year, the whales are hungry and they're making the most of the natural. This is fisheries official narrative, right? But it's off its beaten track in the context of when it showed up and where it was. They're growing as recovery has been a bit tougher for other species. So when DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, tell you something, it's just a cover story always. Humpback whales may say aloha, goodbye to Hawaii, Hawaii is one of their breeding grounds, right? So they've been doing this for millions of years. They're not just going to abandon it. This is their instinct, right? Whale washes up with huge chunks taken out of it. Well, that doesn't mean it died. The sharks kill it. The sharks will eat it after it dies, right? And then they loaded it up on a lorry and shipped it off. Who knows where. 25-foot humpback whale washes up in New Jersey. Another one washed up in Cape May County. It was under an abandoned dock. You can see another one there. Dead humpback whale. That's the same one in New Jersey. Abandoned marina. So this story here is out of Canada, claiming the avian flu was killing harbor seals in Quebec, which is way interior Canada, by the way. That's jumping the species. So this year, the narrative came out, and if you go watch my last video on this stuff, what we were showing was that it didn't matter if it was a raccoon or a fox or whatever. They were testing it, even in the middle of Canada where there's no oceans, they were testing it for the bird flu and finding them positive, claiming the babies in particular were dying of different species. And I've done a whole 2-hour presentation on this weird 2-week news. And it was also the same thing in the United Kingdom. And so they were trying to, it was like, and this was the same time as they promoted nuclear, we're coming out trying to blame the die-offs of all species on the bird flu. They couldn't quantify any of those assertions. 12 harbor seals in Quebec have tested positive for the flu. It would be the first known case in Canada of a bird to marine mammal transmission. No, they starved to death is what happened to these animals. In the St. Lawrence estuary, 250-kilometer long ecosystem that runs just north of Quebec City all the way to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is the ocean. So freshwater, but this is where Quebec City is freshwater, 250 kilometers away from the St. Lawrence estuaries where it turns into the saltwater. Suggesting the virus is probably the cause. There's no reason that they would look for that in these animals. And this we've seen on both sides of the Atlantic where they done that at the same time. This showed up allegedly on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean at the same time. So the lesions, which is radiation causes lesions too, by the way, on the dead seal's internal organs suggest that they're not just carrying the virus, something else. And then they're saying the virus is probably killing the seals. But lesions on the organs, children will get that at 11 becquerels a kilogram. Animals are not immune to radioactive fallout, right? They're much more vulnerable, unfortunately. Hopefully it won't affect the area's whales, dolphins, and other marine wildlife. So they were setting the seed, and we see them do this over and over, suggesting it's just going to randomly jump to everything. This is an impossible postulation, and yet here we've seen them do it in all kinds of media, doing the exact same thing. So really, you're going to suggest that the bird flu is going to jump to whales and dolphins and other marine wildlife because they're all dying from starvation, see? and just lump it all together, because the nuclear industry is now on a major push because it's dying. Also, deceased North Oregon coast gray whale likely tied to larger issue of an unusual mortality event. Well, clearly that one is emaciated. Findings showed evidence of malnourishment. Well, malnourishment is a whale goes from 12 inches of blubber to 2 or 3. See? It's great, skinny gray whales and malnourished are emaciated. And it can't be emaciated because you didn't eat for a couple of days. That takes several months for them to end up. So they didn't find food for a huge range is what I'm trying to articulate there. Much of that unusual mortality event issue seems to stem from whales simply being undernourished, aka starving to death. It's not simply, because they must travel thousands of kilometers without finding food for that to happen. Starting in 2019, it started long before 2019. A record number of deceased gray whales started washing ashore in the Pacific Northwest beaches. These die-offs are both the Atlantic and the Pacific and worldwide, including California, British Columbia. And I showed you the research expeditions at the beginning of the show briefly of British Columbia. If you scan my last presentation from last night, I put in a lot more of the research expedition was also in that video. Just scan through it and you'll find the marine expedition parts. From British Columbia, the Oregon coast, Washington coast, which is headed, when you go from British Columbia to Oregon and Washington, you're headed towards California, right? And Kevin is walking California. Yoshi Samatsu also was down, a former editor for the Japan Times in California, walking the coastline. Not like Kevin, right? But had done it quite a lot. And I had done all the way to Alaska, and or to the Alaska coastline. But if, because there's 27,000 islands we're talking about where I was doing the research for 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year without coming home and staying on the ocean. And so you can't just have it and stop at the border. Alaska has to be exterminated, the same as the Canadian coastline was. And like that information is available up at the nuclearproctologist.org. And we have mass die-offs also of insects here on the East Coast right now, and birds currently. The last 3 weeks, we have birds showing up everywhere in mass dying off. And this is the biggest migratory route on the planet we're on to in the Atlantic. There are also fewer whales out there than before. That's because you had some. So they estimate around 7,000 gray whales died in the last few years. That's a catastrophic event. They died of starvation. And a smaller whale population also means less of them washing up after dying. So the less left, the less you'll find, right? Because you're not going to find maybe, if you're really, really lucky, 10%. The colleagues followed nearly 200 whales by drones for 3 years. They found whales in worsening condition, primarily that they were skinnier in many cases. So they were showing this consistency of them whittling away in increments over several years. It's coincided with many whale strandings findings. There's many different species. It wasn't just the Pacific, obviously. Climate change is likely driving much of that. I'm not laughing. I'll show you what I mean. Here's what climate change actually is. This is a Fukushima radioactive fallout over 19 days were unpointed. This is invisible plume, covers the entire planet. It's pulsing energy almost at the speed of light. Think of a visible snowstorm, rather, covering the entire planet at the same time for years and years and years, for millions of years. Then you can appreciate it, right? But you can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or touch it or feel it or pick it up. But that doesn't, you can't perceive it, right? But if it gets in animals, insects, birds, and bodies, and humans' bodies, your body attacks every atom with white blood cells for the rest of your life, and that displaces the red blood cells. And your red blood cells carry oxygen and nutrition, right? So as you get rid of that, your immune system is compromised. You're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses. that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign are now life-threatening. This is true for all the species, not just human population. 39-foot humpback. So humpback whales everywhere. Harbor porpoises washing up on the same beaches. 39-foot humpback is a fairly big humpback, older humpback. It says the causes of the deaths are unrelated, but they can't quantify the assertion because they didn't. If they could, they would have. And this is the time of the year when humpback whales are feeding in San Francisco. I think last year there was 9 of them because humpback whales normally don't go into San Francisco Bay. Last year it was 9 or 13 washed up on the beaches in San Francisco Bay. So it's not uncommon to have several strandings. It actually is. It's not uncommon since Fukushima, unfortunately, but it is pre-Fukushima. This year they performed necropsies on 7 gray whales, all part of an ongoing unusual mortality event. And the Hubbard's beak whale, there's over 1,000 of them they figured died off the United Kingdom in the last couple of years. They were found huge amounts at a time in different stages of decomposition. A deep sea species rarely seen alive or dead. This is a harbor porpoise they were talking about. Dead humpback whale washes up here in Labrador, up the coastline from where I'm to. Southeastern Labrador. Cape St. Mary's bird residents concerned over dead birds found near the bird sanctuary. Now I go out there each year, and we get footage and 1,000, 1,200 pictures. And this year now they've got die-offs going up, gannets in particular, but other species, not just gannets, down around Cape St. Mary's Bay, which is a very protected area and very well taken care of. These people have been there doing this job for decades, I think. And they really know their stuff. And I've been down talking to them each year. I haven't made it down this year, and that's a huge issue, right? We got to get down there. But this has been a tough year between kidney stones and everything else. You can't travel with kidney stones, right? When kidney stone is finally out, confirmed that 2 weeks ago with CAT scans, and it's actually gone, so I can do a few things. Dead seabirds litter a beach, but we got issues. I'm not going to get into it right now. Dead seabird litters a beach only a few miles from the bird sanctuary, Cape St. Mary's. It's not very far, it's hours away from where I'm to currently. Now, it's all the way up to Musgrave Harbor, which is where we went in May, because there was a mass die-off of 4 species. And it was common murres and terns, and what else was it? I can't remember. Thick-billed murres, I can't remember, and dovekites. And the first 3 feed on anchovies and squids and sardines and capelin and everything else, smaller species. But the dovekites feed on the microscopic animals. So you had mass die-offs of 600 miles of the coastline. Every community I went into, these little communities, their meeting focal points are gas stations and restaurants and shops, right? And so I visited every one and asked, was there mass die-offs in their community? And a lot of them what I discovered was the birds had never showed up in the community before. And they were showing up everywhere in rivers and streams and ponds on top of that. And they were emaciated for sure. Not maybe, not if. It's not opinion, it's not a conjecture. And then now the die-off, now they're trying to blame it on the avian flu. Has spread to the Avalon and Burin peninsulas, where I want to head out to in the next couple of weeks on the research. And we're probably going to spend 4 or 5 weeks on research expeditions in desperation to get the true gravity of what really happened, because the media is not going to provide you with that. You got to go out there, physically look yourself, and talk to the locals, right? Killing a large number of wild birds like terns, gannets, puffins, and samples of dead birds collected over the past while are being tested. Right? The biologist says he's certain it'll be avian flu, but you would normally never suggest that. You would always say, well, we got to wait for the evidence. That's what you're supposed to do. But we've caught that person being incredibly deceptive and deceitful and dishonest in the last year. And so His word is irrelevant. We'll do the research ourselves. Avian flu will be confirmed. You can't quantify that until that's the point of sending it away and testing. And it's never jumped to these species before. So why insist, right? Anyway. Humpback whale carcasses washes up in Alaska Sound. Marine birds in Newfoundland are dying, this time possibly because of the avian. Possibly because. So they shouldn't include that unless they can quantify it. It's totally a departure from the norm to actually suggest something that's not normal without the evidence. It's like saying they died of car accidents out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's just not something you would say without the documentation. It's a lot of birds, and it's got to be in the thousands. It's got to be in the tens of thousands. That was a fisherman, right? This was a gannet colony. Now, like I say, we actually go out and hang out there for most of the day and take huge amounts of videos and pictures that I'm not imported, unfortunately, tonight, which I should have. But we got so much to get through, as you'll see. Dead seabirds are being discovered once again in parts of Newfoundland. From Placentia Bay and Cape St. Mary's to the Avalon Peninsula to Point May. I'm actually on the Avalon. And southern Burin Peninsula. I'll show you where that's actually too. And so I'm over here where my finger disappears. And see the community up there called Dildo? Only in Newfoundland, man. And so what they're talking about is over here. St. Mary's is right there, but also the point, right? And because I'm in the way. And they're also talking up here, this is the Burin Peninsula. But now they're saying it's jumped the coastline. Right now they're saying it's up past Terranova. We went up there in the snowstorm, right? Camped out, and because they had a mass die-off. And each day, if they put it on social media, local government agencies would show up immediately and collect dead birds and not say nothing to the communities. And even then, the communities were so brainwashed, they were regurgitating the words bird flu. And I said no. But it came out that they had all starved to death. Once again, dead birds are being discovered once again in parts of Newfoundland because in April and May, there was 4 species washing up all the way to Labrador. And they were emaciated. They had starved to death. We went up and actually researched it, but they admitted it in the media. Now they're claiming it's bird flu, but it's obviously they had starved to death. In the spring, dead or dying murres were being found by the hundreds, yes, everywhere, in every community. In the western regions of the island, sea ice was the suspected cause of the event. Now I went there and I talked to the locals, like I said, and we were able, from the hills, you were able to see far out to sea. There was on the coastline, in the harbors, you would find some pack ice, and you can get up to 200 miles of pack ice thick. 200 miles off the coastline of ice is not necessarily unusual. These birds were supposed to be headed to the Arctic, not to Newfoundland and Labrador. See? Now, the most ice that we've seen on the whole coastline was maybe a quarter mile thick. And so the suggestion that the sea ice was the cause of the event, where the birds couldn't dive down and get food, that's simply not true, because sea ice, you still leave open spots for the birds to dive down through. These birds dive 600 feet all day long. And so they'll come up with all kinds of openings. It's actually as simple as that, right? So it's ridiculous to suggest that sea ice was the cause of it. Birds are not stupid. They can navigate with sea ice, and I've done it all my life. I've seen them all my life do it. This time, however, biologists fear that the avian flu, they fear, but you can't quantify it, so you shouldn't say it and you shouldn't claim it, because that's significant, because it's never jumped to these species and done this before, to the wild species. It's absurd that anybody would suggest that. It's absolutely incredible failure and a betrayal to suggest that the avian flu. But this is the government's official narrative, and they just do what they're told. And so you expect the lies and the deceit and deception, and I don't know how they can live with themselves. I really don't understand that. Other than documenting mortality, the spread and the trajectory of the disease as it moves across the island. This is 900 kilometers across this island, by the way. It looks like it's been coming from the west, the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Well, originally they were claiming it was in central Canada on top of that. This is a desperate lie because the industry was trying to look for a nuclear renaissance and they couldn't have a billion-pound monkey on their back of mass die-offs. One of our students on Great Island had 8 dead puffins. Now, we got headlines from a number of years ago where they found 200 dead puffins on a beach. And in order for that to happen, they estimated about 1/3 of the population must have died. So when you find a group, that's incredibly... Pre-Fukushima, the odds of finding 2 dead birds on the same beach, better chances of getting hit by a Soviet satellite. So there's the 3 places at that time that they were talking about. The Witless Bay, Cape St. Mary's, and the Burin Peninsula. And I'm right in the middle of all of this. And it's now gone all the way up the coastline is what they're claiming in the last week. We want to get out there and do research expeditions and find out what's really going on. We want to photograph and video the birds ourselves. We want to talk to the locals ourselves. We can't put our fate into a system that has been compromised for decades and decades. It's a problem being witnessed throughout the Maritimes. Hundreds of dead birds found on the shores of New Brunswick, and we covered that in the last presentation on die-offs, right? This whole start of this avian flu narrative, we actually covered that. It's on my site in my last presentation. Thousands were killed in Quebec with avian influenza as the main culprit. Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia also reporting dead birds by the hundreds, right? And we covered all of that, and ducks and everything else, the eider ducks. And it's really difficult for them to be able to quantify their assertions, right? Because of the highly contagious disease, has never been, and as I showed you in my last presentation, has never jumped to multiple species or a single species of wild animals. Home to thousands of seabirds of varying species and gulls, razorbills, common murres, cormorants, gannets. Cormorants are actually not native to our province. Gannets are, and there's gannets live in colonies, right? And they shouldn't be up in Quebec. And should be black-legged kittiwakes. There's a whole whack of species they're not acknowledging, by the way. He said his group counted 53 dead murres, 10 dead gannets, among others, in one day alone. That's a catastrophic number. Beach was littered with dead animals. And then he wants people to report it to the proper authority, which refuses to acknowledge the Fukushima nuclear meltdown, for starters. It all began about a month ago, and I seen them when I first started lobster fishing. It started with gannets. I didn't see many puffins and terns, but it seems like in the last couple of weeks there have been a lot of dead birds washing ashore, floating on the water. It's very alarming. Indeed. We got to get there and see it ourselves, see if they're emaciated. He doesn't think starvation is the problem. I come across had fat bellies but looked sick. Well, yeah, because you get radiation poisoning. You can still eat, but the radiation won't let you uptake nutrition. They call it leukemia, right? Because your body's saturated with white blood cells instead of red blood cells, which is leukemia. It's got to be in the thousands. Again, that's an individual's personal opinion, by the way. If you can find roads to the coastline, you're going to find dead birds washed up. So that, you can't have that without you're into being polite. 100,000 plus birds. Now the East Coast, where I'm to, is the biggest migratory on the planet. Typically, you get 45 million migratory birds during the migratory season. And Baccaloo Island is supposed to have the biggest population of storm petrels. But we've been out there for the last 3 years. And because they're nocturnal, we have to get out there in the dark, right, with the spotlights. You're not allowed to get on the physical island, but there's good shelter, right? So you can cruise along the island. I've been out there in the dark by myself, and I can't find them. Earlier in April, part of the reports of the die-off, they happened to mention that the storm petrels were actually not doing good over the last couple of years, which is the first time that we heard them acknowledge that there was an issue. But we were able to identify that over the last couple of years. Researchers still don't know what killed hundreds of birds last summer. This was the insect birds. 1,000 dead birds with a mysterious illness reported around Pennsylvania. And the outbreak appeared to have vanished, but they don't know what it was. The sick birds were typically found trembling on the ground with their eyes, and their eyes had lesions. And lesions are associated with radioactive poisoning, folks. They rule out pesticides and regular diseases, and it's unusual for the source of such a widespread sickness to remain a mystery if you refuse to acknowledge radiation exists, right? We just covered this story, didn't we? Why did siskin cross the continent? A bird banded in Maryland 2 years ago turned up this spring in British Columbia, and highlighting the nomadic lifestyle of one finch species. If you spend as much time outside as British Columbia rural islands as a professional gardener, it's a sad inevitably that you will encounter dead birds. Now, I lived in BC for decades, and we done the research expeditions out there. And the coastline was stripped of insects too. This one had traveled, this is pretty amazing, a little finch travels 2,400 miles. So that's pretty impressive stuff. When they're feeding their young, they eat more insects, mainly beetles, for protein. I was got my hair cut a couple of days ago. The barber told me he had 3 birds' nests under his porch, not in the trees, but under his porch. And so if you like, that's where cats can hang out too, by the way. You don't do that, right? Because that's predatory areas. Because the radiation is sucked up by the trees. There are no spiders in the forest. Spiders on the houses and trucks and everything else, and buildings and shovels and buckets, but there's no spider webs in the forest. Because that's how normally I would check to see what insects are in the forest. And hopefully we get a research expedition in before the year's out. We're running late this year, big time. Just nothing but breakdowns and trouble. And we're doing the best we can. And I can't control all the variables. I'm doing the best I can. When feeding young, they eat more insects. They're dependent upon the insects for the species to populate. In other words, the insects disappear, they stop reproducing, they start hunting for safe havens, like the spiders. Scientists analyzed penguin DNA and found something quite remarkable. They're the lowest evolutionary rates ever detected in birds. They're sentinels, highlighting vulnerability of the cold-adapted fauna in a rapidly warming world. They're actually in with the storm petrels and albatrosses, which is quite, I didn't know that. That's an interesting tidbit. White humpback, they're washed up in Australia beaches, not Migaloo, after famous albino whale. Another humpback whale. Another albino humpback whale. Moby Dick was albino sperm whale, I think, was it? Not that it's real, but scientists test samples from stranded whales. Now, pilot whales in particular are known to wash up in groups, right? But we had 15 washed up here on the west coast, which is 800 kilometers away from me, in January of last year. We actually went out there. And those whales were emaciated and had their thyroids cut out. They were on the beaches for 36 days, and the media didn't report it. And so the locals went down and pulled them off the beaches because the kids were having nightmares because they would drive past the dead whales each day on the way to school and on the way back home, and they just didn't want to go to school no more. I found out about it after 36 days and showed up, and the locals were ecstatic that somebody actually showed up. So for 15 to wash up, it meant about 150 had died on the coastline. So why would you hide it and cover it up? So these whales have died out in the middle of the British Virgin Islands. And as part of the equation, we'll talk about it. We don't know. A mass stranding left more than 50 of the mammals dead. Now, they eat a lot of squid, and a lot of the birds dependent on squid are showing up dead too. And now they claim that stranding are common if there's any kind of military blasting acoustic going on that disrupts the whales' echolocations. But that was true. We would have seen mass strandings everywhere pre-Fukushima because almost every major seagoing ship uses sonar devices, right? It's either 52 or 54 that they disposed of. There was also live whales. Be wary, we don't have marine mammal stranding specialists, which is something that showed up after Fukushima. And we see that showing up everywhere, particularly in the United Kingdom, where nobody is allowed near the whale, only the British diving group, basically. And that other one that I really don't like. Now, non-profit organizations, government ministries, other residents come together to create a stranding network because these are unusual mortality events. Sperm whale calf washes up in Spain. This was a crazy story. Thousands of belugas make their migration through Canada. I missed it. The opportunity to go see that. They blame it on increased Arctic exploration, as well as global rising temperatures. Each summer, beluga whales make their southward migration from the Arctic into the lower regions of Canada, the Hudson Bay, the St. Lawrence. They're amazing because they can actually spin their head like a human, right? They're totally different than the average, or what a whale is. And it's just, there's around 55 belugas will travel down the Churchill River in the Hudson Bay. And that one will last much longer, unfortunately, right? But that's an amazing story. We love stories like that. They talk a lot underwater. It's just constant tweets and whistles and clicks and bangs. And you remember that story? We covered that story where this beluga used to greet the kayaker who used to feed him. And so not all stories, but a rare cougar spotted in Ontario National Park, like a needle in a haystack. The animal was emaciated. And this is something that makes them very dangerous, right? Because there's no prey in a lot of the forest. We know this from the research expeditions up to Alaska, where we would put the microphone and just leave it recording, and you would hear no birds, no animals. Dead whale, quite a find for 7-year-old. And so I hate stories like that where there's another humpback whale obviously washed up. Juvenile, gigantic. Well, they blow up. So shortly after they die, they blow up. Jumping humpback whale lands on a boat. Nobody was hurt. That's an extraordinary, because when I was young, of course, there was a lot of whales, right? And I used to be worried that they were going to hit the propeller or the rudder, which steers the boat. And the fishermen would laugh at me because they've been doing it all their life and their grandparents doing it all their life. They've never heard tell of anything like that, right? So they weren't worried about it. It landed on the bow of a 19-foot boat. When a couple of years back, when I was coming down from Alaska, I had one breach right alongside of me. I was in the sailboat, and it came right up alongside me, and the water actually came in the boat. Avian flu responsible for thousands of dead birds in Newfoundland suggests a preliminary test. Again, this is extraordinary for them to come out and make these assertions without the documentation. This is extraordinary. And it was coordinated on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean at the same time, because I pay attention to all of it worldwide, right? Common murres, razor-bills, gannets, great black-backed gulls have all been found dead. So now they're saying it's jumping to multiple species. If this was true, this would be the biggest story in history, by the way. Preliminary test results, migratory seabirds that have been washing up by the thousands on where I'm to, and the Burin Peninsula on the other side over here, suggest the cause of the death was avian flu, says Canadian Wildlife Services, who, that's their job, just to regurgitate whatever propaganda Ottawa ships out to them, right? If you go talk to them personally, they're not going to regurgitate that narrative at all. And they shouldn't be making these assertions without the documentation. The most common species is common murres, which, as I showed you earlier, dying all the way through the Pacific too, not of the bird flu, but of starvation. So when you got multiple species, and then you're going to blame it on a pathogen that has no legacy of doing it, that's extraordinary, right? That's idiotic, really. It's a coward thing to do. Whitham said the recent seabird deaths seem to be linked to seabird breeding in Newfoundland along Cape St. Mary's, which is a major breeding ground. You know, the ocean comes up 500-600 feet, or the land comes up 500 or 600 feet straight out of the ocean. If you shipwreck, there's no way. The only way to rescue you is by helicopter. Like on the West Coast, they have a Coast Guard in every community. On the East Coast, they have 2 Coast Guards, one in Gander and one in St. John's. They're helicopters. It's a totally different coastline. You're out in the Atlantic Ocean, isolated, and you're not susceptible to the normal. Yeah, they're perpetual liars is what we discovered. We don't know if dogs can get avian influenza, but it's certainly better safe than sorry. So don't let your dogs go near it. And suggesting that is going to create mass panic, of course. Elusive sperm whale washes up dead. And so sperm whales, we see that quite a lot in the last couple of years. And like in groups running up on the beaches and emaciated. The 10 I showed you earlier, they were all emaciated. They starved to death, which is supposed to be impossible because it takes thousands of miles of no food for them to become emaciated. The Portuguese beach sperm whales. It's pretty damn rare to see a sperm whale wash up in the Portuguese beaches. Any member of the public find a dead animal washed up, report them to the cover up known as the stranding coordination. I lost all respect for this bizarre stranding organizations. Dead bird and 30-foot whale found on Scott's Beach amid avian. So now they're saying suggesting whale, 30-foot whale died of the bird flu. That's what they're doing, right? To the average person that reads that headline, that's what they're trying to suggest, right? Causing the death of thousands of coastal birds, because this was happening on both sides. The stories came out on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, 5,500 miles apart, at the same time. Bodies of more than 100 dead birds, 30-foot whales were discovered in the Scots Beach. Gannets, guillemots, fulmars, northern fulmars were among the species reported to found among the sands and the seaweed. British media is disgusting, isn't it? United Kingdom media. A mink whale was also found on the beach. Well, suggesting the whale died of the bird flu is like, that's what you expect of the United Kingdom media. It's pathetic, right? The birds covered the full length of the beach at low tide. For that to happen, you had to have a huge die-off to get several birds on the beach, but to have the whole beach covered in dead birds, that's a massive die-off, folks. Potentially infected. Of course, the British media just boggles the mind why they hate everybody so much. So they don't know if it was carrying the flu, but they're saying it was the flu, right? Hard cases. The avian flu wiped out the majority of the seabirds, but they don't know for sure whether it was carrying the viruses, do they? And when you see this number, it generally implies there's 1 million of them died. Of birds. If the birds are confirmed to have died of avian flu, well, that's what, you put avian flu in the headline, and then even implied the whale had died of it. Heightened concern over long-term effect of the bird die-offs. That's a seagull. This is Newfoundlander again talking about where I'm to. On the shores of eastern Newfoundland, various species, the Burin Southern Peninsula, including terns and gannets and many other species, it's believed are falling victim to the avian or bird flu. Again, this is extraordinary to come out and, like in May, the locals were asked. Now they don't ask the locals per se. It's believed they're falling victims. It's a disgrace to suggest it without the documentation. Absolute disgrace. The Witless Bay Reserve, adding the entire ecosystem in that area will feel the effect. A beautiful place down there, folks. If you've never seen it, just stunning. So the local puffin and whale watch operator says he's seen many dead birds. The birds are essentially for returning many nutrients to the ocean from the capelin diet in the form of nitrates. It's ridiculous to go that route when you got a mass die-off. Meanwhile, Chief Veterinarian Officer warns that the dead birds can pose a risk to mammals, including cats and dogs. Again, they can't quantify that assertion. They shouldn't be saying it. It's outrageous. And it's 100% indicates a cover-up when you start doing that. Scavenging animals, including foxes, raccoons, and skunks, tested positive in other parts of the continent. Hard cases. Now, we covered that in the last presentation on marine die-offs, right? And foxes, and baby foxes, and baby raccoons, baby this and baby that. It was extraordinary, right? That in a 2-week period, all these stories come out, and then they use that now as evidence for after, as saying that's the evidence, right? 100% cover-up. You always keep dogs on a leash when going near the shorelines. Like, this is the kooky talk. It's the nuclear industry, right? Because they want to promote nuclear in their desperation because the industry now is dying. So, the seals around Quebec have tested positive for the flu after resting on the rocks contaminated by the feces from the infected birds. Again, they can't quantify that the birds were actually... Dead seabirds wash up the northeast coast as avian... Now they're talking about up towards Musgrave Harbour. And the thick-billed murres. They're showing you the thick-billed murres for the first time. The best way for him to summarize is that the seabird's version of COVID-19. That's despicable. What a despicable statement. What a disgusting statement. We were up in Musgrave Harbour in April and May when they had a mass die-off of starvation, and that was covered up. Wyoming Game and Fish wants dead grouse for virus testing. So now they're claiming that the virus is killing the grouse. Hard cases. Newfoundland Puffin Rescue Patrol is put on pause as avian flu kills thousands of seabirds. So the puffins are dying apparently down there too. And I can't quite remember. Hang on. So they're going to suspend the puffins and storm petrel patrols because they're worried that, not worried, but they create this panic that, the birds can spread it to humans, right? It's disgusting, really. Witless Bay, Newfoundland, which sits across from a reserve that is home to more than 260,000 pair of the plum orange-billed puffins. Climate change predicts southerly shift of great whale species in New Zealand. So, right? Oh, well, they're not here because there was a southerly change, and that's why the whales didn't show up this year. The whales been doing this route for millions of years, and they're just going to magically give it up. No, this is how they pretend that the whales didn't die. They went somewhere else, Dana. That's an emaciated whale right there. New Zealand's sperm and blue whales will move southward with warming climates, lost habitat and new habitat, where the tour boats can't go, right? So therefore, they're out there, but we just can't get there, right? With the tourist boats. No, they're emaciated and died off. Let me check the poll here tonight. We got a poll. Has Fukushima radioactive fallout, also known as the atomic plague, broken the food chain and caused mass die-offs? We got 55 votes. 98% of the votes are saying that Fukushima has played the significant role. 95%. Let's keep rolling here. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing good. Let's keep moving because we're on a groove here. Population's dropped by the thousands, Cape St. Mary's. Yeah, that's a stunning picture because normally it's plugged with the animals. I've showed you these pictures before that I've taken myself, right, from the same spot where those pictures were taken. So now they're saying avian flus killed thousands of seabirds would normally nest at the colony. No, they broke the food chain was broken, and now that's the cover story. Dead gannets and murres, and shown signs of spreading further across the island. So just because they tell you something, you got to go investigate this stuff. You can't trust them. And what we've always discovered is that they're just going to tell whatever Ottawa tells them to say, that's what they're going to say. And they're going to keep saying it over and over. No resistance allowed. No dissenting voices allowed. Showing signs of spreading further, like Lumsden and Musgrave Harbour. And we might head down there in the next couple of weeks and find out ourselves. And I don't trust him because he's incredibly deceitful and dishonest and using the bird flu, which is just a conjecture, without the evidence to prove it. Because it's never jumped multiple species. If it did, it would be panic worldwide if that was actually happening. You know, move from the south coast to the Cape St. Mary's, now to Witless Bay. And so they only spokesperson, they have one spokesperson, and everybody has to ask him. Nobody's allowed to talk to anybody else. They're only allowed to use whatever he says, right? Now, not him, because he works at that place, right? He's one of the rangers that work there. He's never seen anything like it. He's been there for several decades, apparently. But this guy is the only guy that the media is interviewing. And he's just like, bird flu, bird flu. Why do we find dead bumblebees under lime trees? That was an interesting story. Dead bumblebees under lime trees. Well, the pollen is radioactive for starters, so we're seeing the birds now, the bees, going extinct. Newfoundland is supposed to be one of the few places on the planet if not the only spot on the planet, allegedly, where bees weren't susceptible, and this story is not about Newfoundland, but where bees weren't being killed off by mysterious diseases. By feeding lime tree nectar to captive bred bumblebees, biologists at the Norwegian Institute have ruled out the possibility that the insects are being poisoned. So they fed them a lime tree nectar, and it didn't kill the bees in experiments. What they discovered is the dead bumblebees are emaciated. Try wrapping your mind around that story. And often bear significant injuries, suggest that individuals are weakened by starvation. Because the plants don't have bacteria and brain's gone dead on me today. And fungus, right? And so the plants are not producing, which is caused by Fukushima radioactive fallout, are being targeted by hungry birds, with the resulting wounds hastening their demise. Well, birds don't wound insects. If they do, they'll just grab them and pick them up and eat them. Like, have you ever seen a bird? Like, I can show you studies where 54 are, I should dig it up, I suppose, where, I can't remember, it was 60 nests or something, were raising their birds. And over 22 days, from eggs to fledglings, they consumed 5.4 million insects. And I was talking earlier, I think I didn't finish the story, was I got my hair cut. The barber was saying that he had 3 nests under his porch, and they had eggs, but the eggs didn't come to fruition. And you've never seen them set up nest in the porch, under the porch, because obviously, he didn't say it, but obviously that's, a cat can get them easily, right? And would. Nearly 600 dead penguins washed up on the Brazilian beaches after a cyclone. So they're trying to blame a cyclone with 100-kilometer-an-hour winds. Now, a penguin can dive 300 feet all day long, and not can, but does. And it can stay down for 10, 15 minutes at a time. It comes up and gets breath, and then goes back down. Penguins don't wait for perfect weather to go on their migratory route. They regularly migratory route through storms. It's irrelevant. Once they get down below the height of the wave, it's perfectly calm, right? Winds reach more than 100 kilometers per hour. And and they're claiming that killed all the penguins, 600 penguins that washed up on the beaches, because they got caught and sick. This is absurdness. And we see this a lot of the times, right? But it's absurd to suggest that. Like, they don't interview marine biologists. They interview some spokesperson for the government agencies, right? The animals were found on several beaches at the state capital. The cyclone moved to the southeast of Brazil, which had major die-offs over the last couple of years, by the way. And they didn't try to blame it on cyclones. Adding animals like seagulls and turtles were also found. This is bordering on madness that they would suggest that birds can't handle weather when that's what they're perfectly designed for, right? They're genetically superior for that environment. Generally, the animals that appear after cyclones are the weakest. Again, this is madness, folks. When it comes to breathe on the surface, it ends up drowning in rough seas, the specialists told the local press, and the local press can't even go look to see that that's their normal habitat. Like, they're designed to go in that environment and be in perfect harmony. It's absurd. Like, Britain does that a lot too, where Britain will blame die-offs on storm. Oh, there was a storm. There's like 60-kilometer-an-hour winds. That killed all the whales and the birds. Yes, sirree. Winds of more than 100 kilometers were recorded between Thursday and Friday. So what? It's absurd. It's like saying the fish died on the ocean floor because they had a storm. It's absurd. By the way, African penguins are also dying. They're blaming that on shipping noise. desperation. It's being driven away from its natural habitat because there's a ship fueling set up off the coastline. I can show you studies that says, fake studies. Let's see if I can find some for you. You can have a few laughs. Unfortunately, we can't put too much faith in the academic world anymore. I'll show you why. Hopefully. Let me take a second. Always entertaining. No, I can't find it. I can show you a collection, though, of the crazies, academics. Hang on, here we go. Just a little sample of crazies. So academics call for burning down skeptics' homes, climate alarmists. Climate change skepticism, a sickness must be treated, says a professor. Climate Fund seeks UN-style diplomatic immunity so they can vilify and demonize, marginalize you and your friends and your families and your loved ones, but they get immunity. Australian professor says global warming deniers should be sentenced to death. And the last one, disability rights. Colin Brewer, he's a disability rights counselor, says disabled children should be put to death. But he's in charge of disabled children in Australia on top of that. So you get radioactive fallout, you can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it, pick it up or throw rocks at it. But when you type of cesium, remember there's a whole lot of different cesium too. There's a whole lot of uranium isotopes they won't even acknowledge. The biggest byproduct of the radiated reactor's fuel rods is curium. And curium, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Let's keep it rolling. The penguins in Africa, Angola Bay, once the world's largest breeding colony of birds, has plummeted since South Africa started to allow ships in the area to refuel at sea, which coincides also with Fukushima fallout, unfortunately. The bay is rich in marine and bird life, where southern right whales roam in sheltered waters. Noise levels have doubled, which led to the study, said writers, and if you're coming from writers, it's suspect right away, right? Elevated noise levels affect the marine mammal's ability to find and coral prey. Which is true, but it's not 100% true. Because they have similar setups worldwide, and we don't see that being blamed on the mass die-offs. Starvation, though, caused mass bird deaths. Great shearwaters are the primal casualties. Such a beautiful bird. The large numbers of dead birds found on the island shores in June have been confirmed to have died from starvation, but it was originally blamed on bird flu, right? In June, the state issued an announcement suspecting highly pathogenic avian bird flu, influenza, which is not known to jump to these species, by the way, to be killing the birds, which is a bizarre assertion when you don't have any precedents, right? But it also included seagulls, ducks, terns, cormorants in Massachusetts coastal areas. And apparently it was due to starvation, not pathogens or the avian flu. So that came out a couple of days ago. That was really interesting, that they went against the consensus, the propaganda, and said, no, well, actually the birds died of starvation. That the state labeled the dead birds they examined as emaciated. And we haven't heard anything on the contrary. The initial suspicion of the bird flu or avian influenzas being the culprit of the birds that prompted island towns to post warnings online and put up signs for beachgoers. And they confirmed the state labeled dead birds they examined as emaciated. And that many of the misidentified dead cormorants reported by passerbys were actually the great shearwaters. They're such beautiful birds, eh? And 95% of the birds washed up on our beaches are great shearwaters, most of them juveniles, which is indicative of starvation. None of them tested positive for the flu. All were emaciated, and the consensus is they died of starvation. And it's uncertain as why so many dead great shearwaters came up into the Massachusetts shore, but it is not unprecedented. Several large-scale die-offs have occurred in the North Atlantic in June during the past decade since Fukushima nuclear meltdowns, not pre-Fukushima. Is whether the birds' starvation events are occurring more frequently than in the past. See, because a lot of people, they look at the last decade where this is normal, but they don't do the comparison of pre-Fukushima nuclear catastrophic event. We have incomplete understanding of the full ecology of the great shearwaters and other pelagic birds that eat each other, basically, eat fish rather. They range over thousands of miles of the ocean, so if they show up emaciated, it's because the ocean is dying. Is sound pollution killing the whales? And we've seen them trying to blame the mass strandings on solar storms recently, right? If that was true, then this would be happening all the time, not post-Fukushima. A noise that is killing the whale. This is... the mass mortality events are starvation. This year, now they're trying to blame everything that dies. If you go out and run over a bird, they'll pick it up and say, it had bird flu. Do Navy operations kill whales? Well, probably. But the sonars are on all seagoing ships for, 65, 70 years. So if the sonar was because back in the original day, the sonars were brutal. They were friggin' brutal. And, the last sounder that I bought, you can just take fiberglass inside your boat and take the transducer and fiberglass it inside your boat, not outside your boat. It'll shoot through the boat and read the fish and the depth accurately right through your boat. That's a very, very, very powerful signal, right? And so whenever I was around whales and stuff like that, I would turn if it was safe, I would always turn my sounder off. Even today I'll do that, right? 10 sperm whales die after stranding. The whales are dying from starvation, which takes thousands of kilometers without finding food. These are not healthy whales that are washing up. These are emaciated whales. 3 more sperm whales found washed up at the beaches where a 50-foot mammal died. So when you start looking at the history over the last number of years, you start realizing the big picture. This story was a Saudi woman who was using Twitter. She came back on vacation and she had retweeted some activist tweets, and they arrested her, gave her 34 years in jail, and after that she has a 34-year travel ban. So for 68 years she's a prisoner of Saudi Arabia. You'll never be free in Saudi Arabia, will you? 6 dolphins rescued and released off Cape Cod in the last week. I think I got the story yesterday or the day before. There was a walrus that's been, we originally seen it down, I think was United Kingdom, right? Where it's not supposed to be. And they're supposed to be off my coastline where I'm to, because they eat shellfish, right? So the government had killed a whale, or killed a walrus, because they thought the walrus was dangerous, and people wouldn't stop going down and getting pictures of the animal. So we carefully examined all possible solutions. We could not guarantee the well-being of the animal by any of the means available, so they decided to kill it. This is absurdness. The whole story is absurd, right? The name for the walrus is reference to the Norse goddess of beauty and love. So they shot it and killed it. I'm assuming that's what they done. They normally live in a more northerly latitude of the Arctic, not in there, right? They've been filmed chasing a duck, attacking a swan, which is unusual, and dozing on boats. So I can see that being a problem, though. 3,000 pounds climbing up on your boat. And it had no fear of people, and people had no fear of it. It would come up looking for food. It would never, ever suggest that it was going to hurt somebody. But it probably climbed into the wrong boat and got the death sentence for it. Krill. Normally the migratory of the krill, you'll get migratory of whales and porpoises and seals and animals or marine mammals and birds and everything else. And they'll follow the migratory krill for thousands of miles, right? And they got a smorgasbord at their fingertip. Some of these species grow up to 15 centimeters, 6 inches. And then krill is consumed by other species, and they get bigger and bigger, and they're extremely important to the food chain, right? And they can live for 5 and 6 years, which is important because you see them start to disappear in increments over time, and you don't notice it, right, rather? Few species, because they don't reproduce, right? You have the big mass, which could be hundreds of square miles, migratory. But eventually, after a number of years, because they're not reproducing the way they're supposed to, because the radioactive fallout has destroyed the ecosystem. And so they're important because they're they eat the phytoplankton and the zooplankton and everything, and then other species will eat them as part of the food chain, right? It's super important. And then in Asana, I mentioned earlier, there was a 5.3 earthquake in Japan last night. But it didn't give us much documentation. It mentioned, because normally it would tell you how far off the coastline and the depth. In the last couple of years, typically it would just tell you latitude and longitude. It wouldn't tell you anything else. They changed a couple of years ago after the Hokkaido massive earthquake right alongside of a nuclear power plant. They went radio silence. But there, I didn't do a follow-up on that today because we were getting ready to do a marine story at night. I forgot about it till now. So after, I'm going to have to go look that up and see if the earthquake... But this was off the coastline. This was 53 minutes after the earthquake. The media was saying the nuclear watchdog has reported no abnormalities at any of the nuclear power stations, including Fukushima. These are massive sites. It takes you 10, 15 hours to quantify those types of assertions. Okay, so now we're going to go back. We're at November 2021, and we're going to head towards right now. Right, and this was a folder that I never got around to doing. We're going to zip through this one. A vacationer spots a 900-pound pygmy sperm whale washed ashore near the motel. It's unusual for pygmy sperm whales to wash up anywhere. They blamed it on strong winds and heavy seas. Again, this is madness that suggests that whales can't survive in that environment. But if you look at it, it's actually emaciated. I don't know if you mentioned that there. They eat a lot of squid, and they have glands that absorb the ink, and they can actually squirt the ink out like the squid can. That's pretty friggin' amazing. Bald eagles found tangled together. I don't know, that probably got nothing to do with Fukushima, but it was just a story that was interesting. which likely a fight for territory. Beached whale removed. Emaciated whale was removed from the coastline. Estimated weight of 900 pounds. Looks severely emaciated. Severely emaciated is right. Co-founder of Sea Search Research and Conservation. Researchers baffled by what could be causing the mass death of Cape fur seals. Well, they're emaciated and starving to death. Thousands of the dead seal have been washing up on beaches. They've yet to conclusively identify the cause of the mass die-off. Apparently, right, it's emaciation. They had died from starvation. Very thin. There was no blubber on the animals. If it was very thin, almost non-existent. So they were emaciated, right? And a whale washed up there. I don't know what kind of whale that was. Thousands of thin, which is emaciated, dead, starved to death. Fur whales die on the west coast beaches. So normally they can find enough at low tide to survive on, get some nutrition, right? Only 2% of the Great Barrier Reef has escaped coral bleaching, and which is radioactive fallout. 80% of the beaches are now bleached severely, at least once since 2016. 1,500 miles comprising of 3,000 individual reefs. And I know that they were trying to preserve some of the healthy stuff, and they were trying to breed it, right? Back-to-back mass bleaching events, what they call mass 2016, 17, 2020, don't give coral enough time to heal. No, well, it takes thousands of years for it to build up, right? Insect populations are dying out. I don't know what that's all about. Oh, yeah. Whale washed ashore on Sea Beach. I don't know if we can extrapolate anything from that. That's emaciated. That's a culvert beak whale, I think, by the looks of it. That's a Sotheby beak whale. I apologize. Coast Guard officers on the scene with the British Divers Marine Life Rescue. They're the only ones really that's allowed to go near the animals. And everybody else is told to run away. If they're full of diseases, you can't go near them. They're owned by the Queen, blah, 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 blah. And so I really disrespect these people. Disrespect, not respect, but disrespect these people. Coast Guard said the whale, which is thought to be not fully grown and female, is dead. The animal is 3.5 meters long, but it's obviously severely emaciated. It's extremely rare to see him anywhere on a coastline. But I mean, that's absolutely unequivocally emaciated whale, right? South Africa investigating seal deaths along the Cape. They're emaciated. So when you look at a seal or a sea lion, there should be no wrinkles whatsoever. None. If you see wrinkles, that means they're not healthy. When you see them like this, that's severely emaciated. It's so crazy to see people recreational while you got dead animals everywhere. It's just bizarre every time I see that. It might be malnutrition. That's only a theory. That's not a theory, that's a fact. South Africa investigate alarming rises in seal deaths along the coastline. Channel 4 commissions TV event to discover what exactly is killing our planet's whales. Well, obviously, it's Fukushima. Radioactive fallout has destroyed the food chain and also caused the whales to be sick, unable to uptake nutrition because they bioaccumulated through the food chain the worse. Is in greater numbers year after year. And every time they use the word climate emergency, they're avoiding having a conversation with anybody. They're making sure people can't have a conversation, see? Look at that seal there. That's severe emaciation. That's incredible emaciation right there. A frightening phenomenon gripping the shores of the west coast in Africa. Seals, young and old, not just young, but young and old, found themselves starving to death. So not just young, it's the old too. Horrifying, eh? And those numbers are just the tail end of October. Wow. Weak and emaciated. Sea lion kills at least 7 pup seals, which is typically when they haven't got food, they'll do that. Has been seen dragging the sea lions killing seals from the sea, dragging it from the sea big distances, and will stay and guard them for a day or two. Wow. That's a crazy story, isn't it? Mountain lion and bear sighting shakes up Angeles National Forest foothill communities. Her 7-year-old dog came to her rescue when she was face to face with a mountain lion. The dog chased the lion away, but is recovering because it got torn up. Badly injured, bleeding with 8 large puncture wounds, requiring 30 stitches. And I do gather some stories to see if there's going to be a connection down the road, so I can keep track of it. So there are stories where I'll grab, where I'm just still trying to figure out what's going on. So I've never seen one in my house like this. Never. Definitely seen less mice and rabbits around this year, so something's up. So they're basically saying there's less food, and that's why the animals coming into the communities, which we talk about a lot. Of the attacks, we'll see the animals are emaciated. And these are supreme hunters, by the way, right? As the mountain habitats dry out, deer and other prey comes in the neighborhood looking for food and water. That's crazy stories. And mountain lions are not far behind. These are all just speculation. Arctic penguin waddles ashore in New Zealand, 2,000 miles from home. It's an extraordinary story, isn't it? No physical injuries, but it was tired and hungry, emaciated. Is that it there, I think? Well, that's not so bad looking. He looks pretty good, I think. I'm not a professional on penguins, unfortunately. Long way from home. I think it's just a single penguin. Yeah, they're saying that he was malnourished, severely dehydrated. Malnourished and severely dehydrated. More than 18,000 birds die in Western Cape of avian flu outbreak. If this was the common MERS, I can't remember. Yeah, the cormorants, rather. Right, because the year before that, they had the same mass die off, or not even the year before that, and they blamed it on starvation. And then they switched the story, the official story, to bird flu. But again, they didn't have a test. They just come out, and there was never follow-up on it. They didn't come out and say, yeah, it's proof now that they died of bird flu. They just started regurgitating that narrative. Huge whale dies after getting himself stuck on the rocks in the English Channel. That's emaciated, man. Look at that. That's a humpback whale, I guess, but looks at that. That's emaciated, folks. Period. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a fin whale. Fin whales typically are fairly skinny, but that's emaciated. She was sick. Total 10 whales were found as stranded in 2015 on that area, include a group of 7 in a single incident, which is totally unusual, by the way. That's emaciated. But they're typically, fin whales are fairly long. They're big whales, very long whales, but they're typically, they do look thin, right? But that one's emaciated. Migrating birds hit hard by California drought. Tule Lake refuge had only 30,000 ducks, down from 3.5 million. Wow. So it went from 3.5 million to 34,000. Ducks and geese are wired to go through droughts. You don't fall out of the sky. They have wings. They move where food and water is typically. But because, well, no, like the migratory route is so ingrained in the animals, they can't resist it unless they're starving to death. And then that's the end of it, right? Hardwired to keep pushing on. And it's increasing risk of extinction because of climate change, which is, climate change is Fukushima, radioactive fallout. That is what climate change is. Because the radiation covers the entire planet in a in just a couple of weeks, right? And then that's the catalyst now for breaking the food chain. And then there's the snowball effect after. It's likely that the eagle's parents brought home meals of especially fatty squirrels. Streams and creeks are not running like they typically would because the glaciers have disappeared since Fukushima. Because the radiation doesn't let the ice crystallize, right? So, plastic doesn't pulse energy every second at the speed of light. Newfoundland agricultural expansion plans paused. This was last year, or earlier this year, I can't remember. Salmon die off on the south coast in September last year. It was reported late in the year. Cost $8 million. This was from hypoxia off the coastline here. And this is off coastline we're onto. And this is the Atlantic. This is the cold ocean compared to the Pacific, right? So it's deep. It's a deep water ocean. So you'd expect a lot of oxygen. You wouldn't expect hypoxia to happen. But this is basically what happened to the salmon down there, from what I can tell. Yeah, due to a sudden drop in oxygen levels. Well, you can't. This is the North Atlantic Ocean. We're an island out in the Atlantic Ocean. You shouldn't have hypoxia. Like there's a lot of dead zones in the ocean where they dump nuclear waste for decades. All kinds of countries were doing it. Britain was one of the most ruthless, and America, and Canada. But Britain was ruthless. 3 decades of going and dumping fuel rods into the ocean. Small tragedy. Returning Burnaby salmon dying before they can spawn. Because the British Columbia, which is what they're talking about, Burnaby, is dependent upon the glaciers. The glaciers disappeared several years ago. They won't acknowledge it. So they have snowpack in the winter, but they no longer have, 10,000-year-old glaciers, solid ice, right? It's just the snowpacks in the winter. And that, because normally the glaciers during droughts would release more water down the streams and rivers and estuaries and everything, and that would raise the level of water and allow the fish to migrate up to their breeding grounds, to their egg laying areas, right? And because the glacier is gone, they don't have that. Not only that, the glacier water would regulate the temperatures in the rivers, the streams, the ponds, the estuaries, and the coastline. That cold water coming down the mountain. But with only warm water and trickling down the mountain, then the eggs and larvae and insects and everything else and small fries and that can't survive because the river is heated up, see? And so this is why we're seeing that happening. When they come back from the ocean to go upriver, the river is too hot for them. And the water is too low in most places. We get so few coho salmon back every year that each unspawned female is a tragedy. Why the rockfish can live for centuries and you can't. A genetic study delves into the secrets of how rockfish live and die like normal fish, say a decade, and some swim for over 200 years. Yeah, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? It's a sin, really, to kill that kind of a species. Can soldier on for more than 200 years. The reason they need to live for 200 years is that's how they survive, right? There's so many species of rockfish. It's amazing eating, but I didn't know that they live to be that old, so I will never eat it again. Females generally don't reach maturity till 20 to 27 years of age. Extremely vulnerable, right, to fishing. Greenland sharks can hit 400 to 500 years old. And the nuclear industry has destroyed our oceans permanently. No future. 400 to 500 years old, man. Wow. Florida's on the verge of 1,000 manatee deaths. And seagrass loss is causing them to starve, scientists. We've covered this a lot over the last couple of years. Big time, right? And it's a terrible story. Like, there's 3 dead manatees right there in one spot. In one spot. That's absurd in a single spot. Unprecedented, yeah. 997 manatees reported up to November the 5th of 2021. Over 11 months surpassed 2020 death toll of 637, and the most deaths since 2013, which is 2 years after Fukushima. Fukushima has to be put into the equation of everything, and you have to rule it out before you can say it's something else. That would be the moral and ethical way to approach this. Hundreds literally died of starvation. Space technology, artificial intelligence to monitor whale mass stranding events. You can't trust the industry to do this stuff, unfortunately. It's very irresponsible to trust the industry to... Keep boogieing, we got lots to get through. Well, coming up with a lot of pictures, so it's not too bad. The team behind the study included scientists from the British Arctic Survey. It doesn't matter. All the World Health Organization, which is the military-industrial complex, which is United Nations, right? You can't quote these people. It's a real mistake to quote that organization. Using satellites to study the whales. Yeah, right. More whales are washing up dead on Bay Area beaches. Gray whales. So every time when I see dead gray whales, and everybody should be doing the same thing, the first thing you're going to assume is they're emaciated. Because there's over 7,000 in the last couple of years that are considered dead, and the majority are always emaciated. So when a whale is emaciated, it can't get out of the way of the ships, right? And so you get more ship strikes. The dead body washes into nets, and then the nets are blamed for it. But the majority of it is blamed on starvation, because the food chain is broken due to Fukushima radioactive fallout. 19 gray whales washed up the California coast 2021, and no clear sign of what killed them. He said about a third of the whales were hit by ships. That's a new craze now. Ships hunt whales, run them over. Every time I hear the word scientist, I get depressed. Huge whale found dead and not eaten for days. Well, look, it's because the stomach was empty. But in order for a whale to die of starvation, it means they traveled thousands of miles and used up all their blubber reserve, and then they died. CDFW saves more than 2 million Chinook salmon from a drought and releases the fish into another river when conditions improve. That's awesome, but that's also desperation, right? But I'm glad they're doing it, don't get me wrong, that's fantastic. Poor catch is battling the Japanese fishing industry, the radioactive fishing industry. And catch volume hit a record low in 2020 for the second consecutive years. Global warming and other factors, which is a garbage can diagnosis, right? On some days, more than half the fish caught in the nets are already dead. It's truly a natural... That's up in Hokkaido, in the northerly most part of Japan. Toxic plankton in Japan. Radioactive plankton from Japan. Video whales, white sperm whale, which is the Moby Dick whale, right, off the coast of Jamaica, and it should never be... Well, I don't know for sure, but... A white sperm whale. Geico put out advertisement that even if birds slam into your buildings, their insurance will cover it because it's happening so much. They're falling out of the sky on their migratory routes from starvation, right? Yeah, that was such a strange commercial. See the bird slamming into the river windows? Geico has no shame, eh? Birds on the roof. So their insurance company, Geico, dead birds. Geico, get your insurance. Geico covers everything. Geico will cover birds destroying die-offs hitting your property is what they're saying. That's ruthless, eh? 40% of North Atlantic right whale population use the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is where we're to on the East Coast, right? 187. Now, they're not supposed to be there. They have changed their migratory route, is what they should be up in Nova Scotia, not in the St. Lawrence. 40% of the population in Canada's Gulf of St. Lawrence. And so the radiation washes down through central Canada. It comes out the Gulf of St. Lawrence, right? Feeding and socializing primarily in the southern parts of the Gulf. Almost all of these whales return every year, a pattern not seen anywhere or elsewhere, and stay for up to 5 months. This is a result that they had changed their habitat in the last couple of years because of the radioactive fallout, right, from Japan. This model is based on 20 days of radioactive fallout. Remember, this is an invisible plume covering the entire planet, pulsing energy every second. When it goes into your forest, it kills the bacteria and the fungus in your forest. And if you know anything about ecosystem, that's the worst case scenario, right? unprecedented number of dead right whales in 2017 and 2019, dead whales. Because normally they would be the Bay of Fundy. I actually dove the Bay of Fundy commercially. It's a 50-foot tide exchange. That's one of the things you probably should never probably try because it's absurd. Animals are spending less time in places where they typically aggregated in the past and observing places we have not found them aggregating before, which is the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So they changed their habitat, which means the ecosystem is severely, it's extraordinary. This is extraordinary. After millions of years of doing the same thing, they got bored and came over to the east coast of Canada and hung out. This is extraordinary, folks. Carcasses of sperm whale washes ashore in Hawaii, which is supposed to be the nursery for humpback whales, for instance. Owners should keep dogs and other pets away so they don't eat it and get sick. That's an incredible statement. Black bear injures Baker countryman. The bear was emaciated. Alaska's absent snowy owl is witnessing a troubling decline in snowy owls. It's one of only 3 active nests they found after weeks of crisscrossing the peninsula. Only 1 were chick hatched. And it failed. The nest failed to survive. Some owls are known to overwinter here, where they spend the majority of their lives, but most relocate for colder months of the year to southern Canada, United States or Texas and Florida, and even Russia. What he's seen in the past few years are the nests are declining. They start disappearing. It's too quiet out here, eerily quiet. If the breeding sites collapse, it might be yet another symptom. Of course, right, the garbage can diagnosis of climate change without quantifying what it actually means. Climate change is radioactive fallout. These whales are so decimated that a single birth was chaired by the very academics who betrayed us in the first place. Over the past decade, the right whale population, which we just talked about, fell from 500 to 335 since 2010. Well, actually since 2011, right? Since Fukushima. It's really alarming how quickly the population declined since Fukushima. Confirmed as human cause. According to the International Union for Non-Conservation of Nature, because they want to acknowledge Fukushima could be an issue. This is what is extraordinary, really. And that they follow the zooplankton, which live at the surface where the radiation first hits the water. And the phytoplankton is the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain. Decades of data revealed the Antarctic circumpolar current, the only ocean current that encircles the entire globe, has started flowing faster. Right, because we're killed the ocean. The ocean doesn't operate the way it's supposed to. We got rid of the glaciers in less than 5 years after Fukushima for the Cascades and the Rocky Mountains. And they're super important amount of fresh water that adds. Warming global temperatures are affecting prevailing westerly winds, causing them to energize ocean eddies, which are smaller active currents of water. Right, so refusing to acknowledge how Fukushima plays a part of that's just the ocean contamination from a German study, right? But this is the Xenon 133 airborne foliage. You can see how quickly it covers the oceans. I'm not sure. Let's play this, shoot through these pictures. Oh, that was a bear attacking a plastic deer. See that? That's crazy. Yeah, I got a bear attacking a plastic deer. Wow. 2 of them, look at that. There might be more than that there. Can't tell. Yeah, there's 2 of them for sure. That's amazing, really. They're attacking an image of a deer. In desperation, no doubt. Hilarious. Let me go back. Carcass 45-foot long whale recovered. That's emaciated whale, if I ever saw one. You don't need to be a marine biologist to say that's emaciated. That's absurd, eh? How's our poll doing tonight? Has Fukushima radioactive fallout, also known as the atomic plague, broken the food chain and caused mass die-off? 68 votes, 94%. That's an overwhelming vote, right? Desert death traps, PVC mining markers are still killing birds. This is a crazy story. They put out 9,000 of these markers, and birds end up going into... Birds fly into the tube but can't escape the smooth-sided cylinders and eventually die from dehydration and starvation. Actor Adrian Greener talks ocean conservation and gift giving. I wish somebody would gift give to me. We just lost a whole summer's research because we couldn't raise $1,000. It's absurd. After years and years of research, we can't fund it because the industry has isolated me, right? Last year, they closed my YouTube channel with 24,000 subscribers while I was out looking for spiders 400 miles away from home in the woods by myself, camping out. And the spiders are missing, right? I was reporting on it each day. And they closed my site down. No strikes, no emails, no warning. And so I started up the site I'm currently on here. And I've been censored constantly, all my videos. It's very rare for me to get any views at all. From overfishing the hypoxia dead zones, which is caused by decades of dumping nuclear waste all over the ocean. They just drove along the ocean throwing nuclear waste overboard. It's like the implications are so evil. There's zero possibility they didn't understand how evil it was. It's zero possibility. They done it out of pure evilness so that the future couldn't have hope. So he's highlighting the issue of plastic pollution and refusing to acknowledge that Fukushima is the pollution that you need to concentrate on. The nuclear industry is hemorrhaging radiation out of 1,000 fuel pools worldwide because they're still splitting the atoms. I just wish the world would wake up and understand what's important. And yeah, plastic's important, but Fukushima and the nuclear industry is a catastrophic event. It's an extinction level event. And if you go back and watch the very beginning of the show, I show you 6 years of expeditions, what we discovered, and why I say it's an extinction event. The weirdest, wildest, and rarest fish of 2021. The one to the left obviously is a very deep water fish. The fish in the bottom right hand corner, that's amazing. And the yellowfish, that's amazing too. It's just, the ocean was this magical world of life And the nuclear industry in particular has gutted it in just a few decades. It's just gut-wrenching, isn't it? That's a beautiful swordfish, folks. 16 foot, 800 to 1,000 pounds. Rare mutant carp. Mutant carp. I got no idea what's going on, but said they don't know how a fish with boat morphs occurred, but it's quite the sight. That's the moonfish. That is just stunning, isn't it? We're almost through all this. We still got a ways to go, but mostly pictures. Demon fish. Let me go back there. Sheep's head, demon fish. It's not a demon fish, it's called a sheep's head fish, I guess. With 2 front teeth. Amazing, beautiful catfish, isn't that something? The biggest sunfish ever, it went around 4,000 pounds, and the picture didn't come out, I guess. Never seen that. Lancet from the Twilight Zone. Football fish. Yeah, the world is just magic and the nuclear industry has destroyed it. The nuclear industry has destroyed everybody's future, and it's time to punch back. Stressed dolphin looking for a dead calf is put to sleep. Some stuff you can't screen capture, right? It not fed for a while, so in other words, it was emaciated. It was emaciated. NOAA federal state agencies continue Gulf restoration efforts 11 years after the oil spill, BP oil, which ran a campaign, right, for carbon footprint and blamed you for it. NOAA, I lost all respect for NOAA a decade ago. $11 years ago, more than $2.4 billion in settlement funds committed to habitat and resource restoration through 2020, and settlement payments will continue through 2031. Yeah, but you destroyed a huge ecosystem, the breadbasket of that part of the States, right? They restored and enhanced approximately 2,350 acres of marsh, beach, and dune habitat, which is 9.5 square kilometers. That's a huge... Fish and invertebrate populations can increase 2 to 15 times more for blue carp, 2 to 20 times for white shrimp, 2 to 10 times for spotted sea trout, 4 to 10 times more for brown shrimp. This is just a fraction of the species that were wiped out. Yeah, it's a terrible story no matter how you look at it, right? Why are hundreds of dead puffins washing up on the coast of Scotland? Emaciated. Suggesting a problem with the marine food chain. Normally, in the wild, puffins have an average lifespan of 25 years, and the adults appears they mate for life. That is extraordinary when you're talking about animals that are supposed to be low on the evolution scale. They mate for life because of just terrifying pictures. Yeah, they show up everywhere. Not just puffins, but razorbills and guillemots too. It's a significant failure of the food chain. So a bird wreck is when you got a lot of birds dying in one area. And you can, if it's a certain species, you'll call it like this one a puffin wreck. And the worst incidents in 50 years was 100 dead birds. And they have thousands and thousands and thousands washing up right now. The bodies appear to be emaciated, unable to find food at sea. 33 pilot whales die of mass stranding, but we're seeing mass stranding of all species, not just pilot whales. But we are seeing acceleration of the pilot whales, right? And my admiration goes out to everybody that participates in trying to save these wonderful creatures. They're a long way from water, aren't they, boy? Wow. But a lot of times, not all the times, but a percentage of times they do succeed, right? But the animals are coming up on the beaches because they're weak and sick from lack of food, is typically what we're seeing. "50 were found stranded, 33 survived. 16 whales were successfully refloated, rather. 33 had died in that particular. Unprecedented die-offs, melting ice, climate change, which is radioactive fallout. That's what climate change actually is radioactive fallout. This is a 20 days of radioactive fallout, covers the whole planet, pulsing energy every second. If you get it in your body, or insects or animals or birds, your body attacks with white blood cells every second for the rest of their lives. Beautiful. Coastline, my goodness. Very difficult to find the die-offs, see? Emaciated. What we're seeing in the Barents Seas this year is unprecedented. The world's ocean holds so much excess heat. Due to atmospheric warming, they're claiming the ocean is holding the heat. But the heat will dissipate. Heat goes up, see? The ocean is heated up because of the radioactive fallout. The radioactive fallout covered the planet. This model is from France in just 16 days. This is all the way, so you know how like a mud puddle. So when it rains, your mud puddles are not clear water. They're full of particulates, right? But when radiation goes in the ocean, it does the same thing where it's suspended from the ocean floor to the surface. It's pulsing energy every second, so it's killing all the microscopic soup of life. So normally a glass of ocean water would have 1 billion creatures into it. So imagine that's saturated with isotopes pulsing energy every second. Anyway, monkeys accused of killing 250 of their dogs. That's a crazy story, right? Mountain lion attacks inside a home. It was emaciated, if I remember correctly. Came in the home after their dog, which is desperation, right? Saanich family captures encounter with a cougar on a camera. Cougar stalked them. That was a scary, scary encounter, folks. This animal was stalking them like it was just terrifying. And their dog is a big dog. It wanted the dog, right? I can't remember if that animal was emaciated. I'm just going to burn through what I got left there. Haunting images of sperm whale strandings. Emaciated. What we see, the majority of the animals are physically emaciated. Look, more than one whale on the same beach. It's extraordinary pre-Fukushima. It's extraordinary. Yeah, the calorie intakes is mind-blowing, but that's the cycle of life too, though, right? And if they don't get their food, they can they can travel long distances without eating, by the way. And so when they show up emaciated, it's because they traveled thousands of miles and couldn't find any food. And therefore, they lose all their blubber. 6 whales and a dolphin stranding in one day. This is extraordinary stuff. A spat of dolphin and whale strandings around the Irish coast. From silent bird songs to starving manatees. What we lost in 2021. Well, I actually there's a video on my site where I've done my collection from 2021 of the mass die-offs, or 2020, I can't remember, on this particular site. It's like a 4-hour marathon video, right? Almost everything is emaciated. Polar bears keep being seen hunting reindeers, which is unusual apparently. Oh yeah, we actually played that video before. Whales and pufferfish among amazing marine life to visit Britain. And pufferfish are not supposed to be in Britain. 75 sightings of humpback whales off the coast of Britain. Visited. Oh yeah, sure. That's just. They're pufferfish are now tourists, folks. Yeah, the avian fluid being blamed for everything. It's absolute madness. Christmas bird count reported lowest numbers in northwest Vermont in 35 years. Extreme heat killing hundreds of penguins on a single day, 2019. I had missed that story. Yeah, well, like they go in the water when there's a lot of heat, cools off, right? They don't die like that. That's emaciated animals. World's largest fish breeding area discovered in the Antarctic. 60 million nests of Antarctic ice fish over 240 square kilometers in the Weddell Sea. As you can see, the Weddell Sea. And that's what it looks like, right? 60 million of these nests. That's just absolutely spectacular, isn't it? 60 million breeding at the time. I love stories like that. I just love them. Anything that gives me hope, I love. Police called to deal with hungry swans repeatedly showing up at a pub for food. Because they can't find it in nature, so they end up at where people are hand feeding them. I got no idea what that is. Or why I highlighted it. I don't speak that language. Oh, that was starfish, which are now extinct in British Columbia. Had washed up mysteriously and died. And other species in there, I can't remember, crabs and clams. Razorback clams, what it looks of it. Yeah, take a picture because that's going extinct. That's what the coastline of British Columbia would normally look like, right? Loaded with marine life everywhere you looked. That would be the norm. Not the norm no more. That's a beautiful picture there. That's a rare picture right there of a flock of birds. How sad is that? Scientists discover, I think that's right whales, is it? New England Aquarium. Yeah, the right whale calves. They found 4 that they didn't know existed. Because there's so few of these animals. That's a big deal, folks. A whale nerd geologist said mine completely blown film 1,000 fin whales in one spot. Yeah, it is. I would love to see that myself. I have a hard time believing these people for some reason, but at least 6 emaciated fin whales wash up dead on the French shore. Remember that story? It was actually 7 or 8, ultimately. It was 2020 September. I put that in there because they'd seen 1,000, right? I was like, oh yeah. Remember all the emaciated whales? Because they can go thousands of miles before they finally die, right? We have what is almost an epidemic. It weighs 10 tons. It should weigh like 100 tons or something. That's not emaciated. I think I got that there somewhere. Yeah, I'm sorry, 74 tons. 73 long tons, 82 short tons. And this one was 10 tons. Full grown, but only weighed 10 tons. And the biggest ones are 126 short tons. That's 250,000 pounds, folks. That is stunning, isn't it? So he was up Coronation Island area, apparently, which is way up there, right? The Antarctic Peninsula. Krill fishing vessels, which is what the whales eat, isn't it? North Atlantic blue and fin whales suspend their spring migration to forage in middle latitude. So whales don't suspend their spring migration, folks. Death could have been caused by ingesting plastic. Yeah, it could be caused by a meteorite struck them from Mars. If they do have plastic in it, it's because there's nothing else in them and they were starving to death and they would just eat anything at that stage, maybe. Yorkshire coast fishermen scared for livelihood as everything is dead for miles. Everything dead for miles. Just the beaches are loaded with dead creatures. So the algae, when you kill off the ocean's ability to produce oxygen, you turn it into a perfect environment for different harmful algae, right? Toxic algae. New study reveals octopus may have been extraterrestrial organisms from space. I have 14,000 hours on the ocean floor, so octopus are totally special animals. They're absolutely amazing. I used to dive with the giant Pacific octopus, 150 pounds with a 15-foot span. A woman makes a gruesome discovery walking beaches at low tide, dead birds. 32 common eider ducks, which is extraordinary. They're hard to find answers. Well, they most likely would have starved to death because that's the consensus we've been looking at for many years now. So the French and others think it was likely pounded to death by storm waves. Really? You think a duck won't get up and fly somewhere else? You think a duck that is built to live in the environment was pounded to death by waves, all 30 odd ducks, do you? See, you lose faith in people when you see stuff like that. She says no. Seals are diving in droves along the South African coast, and what's killing them remains a mystery. Well, they're emaciated. They're incredibly, unbelievably emaciated. He's a scientist who doesn't study seals, has taken it upon herself to find out what's killing him. So how come the system doesn't send out the appropriate people? Because they have them. Because Fukushima is in that equation. If you don't put Fukushima, that's incredibly emaciated. If you don't put Fukushima into the equation, then that's a betrayal. Why bother? Dog walker stunned by ripped squirrel's huge nuts. He's got bigger balls than I do, for goodness sakes. Spider feeding on bats because the insects are gone. It's the first time they ever caught the spider feeding on bats. Anywhere in the world. Yeah, because you can't got no insects. Same as the bat. The bat dependent upon insects, right? So stranding of 3 whales raises alarm over seismic testing for fossil fuels. They do seismic testing all over the world, folks, long before Fukushima, and we don't see mass strandings of animals, right? Fear the 3 whales could be the tip of the... the British are notorious for trying to equate it, right? Oh, it's the beaked whales. They're deep divers. And then they're going to claim that they got decompression illnesses. But decompression illnesses, you have to bring, it's from breathing compressed air and coming up too fast. That air will expand. But if you bring the air with you, you don't have to worry about that when you're coming up, see? New Zealand whales stranding. 29 long-finned pilot whales were already dead in a pod of 34 whales. The majority of these are starvation events. Greenland shark could be 500 years old. I'm just trying to finish this out. We're actually almost there now. A woman died on Tuesday trying to get her dog off a train track. Bless her heart, boy. Birds are dying by the hundreds in western Newfoundland, here in Canada. Or western Newfoundland. This is where I went. When was this? Yeah, April the 1st. I went down and investigated this. With similar reports in Labrador. And we covered that earlier in April of this year, right? And look who they got there. Mr. Government Spokesman himself, right? His job is to tell you lies, right? He gets paid to do that. We went down and investigated. They weren't scrambling. The people didn't hear from any of these folks. They didn't show up. And the interviews that the media done, I called up those people myself and interviewed them myself, right? They were saying they starved to death. Smaller terns, which is typical from radiation poisoning. The birds, animals start getting smaller, right? Anyway, let's finish it out. We're there. That's the end of it now. I don't know of any higher body count of dead birds in Newfoundland's history. These birds were all emaciated. This was just a few months ago. And we went down and investigated it ourselves, right? So they shipped out my package. It didn't show up. They updated it today and said it could be here between yesterday and September the 2nd. It was supposed to be here on the 5th, right? That part hasn't showed up. But the last spot was on the 15th. It showed up in St. John's, which is an hour away or more, right, from me. If you take the highway at high speed. And that was the last. It didn't show up in my mailbox, so I didn't get the parts to show up. I apologize to everybody. It was a long show tonight. We had a lot to get through. And that's the way you tell the stories. You got to go through everything. And so I need another $200 to order in the idler control valve. That might show up earlier, but it's saying on September the 6th would be, it's 300 and what's the price? Was, because that was this evening just before I went live, $384, and we raised 230 or something. So if they put the money back for the pressure washer on my card tomorrow or Saturday, hopefully, I'll go ahead and order it. We still haven't got the other part, but that's the way it works. We got to deal with what we got, right? But if you do decide you want to donate and help me, the links are at the very bottom of the description, way, way down at the bottom of the description. There's 2 links there clearly marked, PayPal, and if you donate at my website, it'll take any credit card, it'll take any kind of donation almost worldwide. If you put the number in, it should accept it. Because this is a big banking organization that does that. I'm just linked to them, right? And I don't know. We never had an issue with this all these years. But season's getting late, and we've lost half the season because of kidney stone, and the other half to breakdowns. And I'm doing the best I can, right? We got a big operation, but we're struggling, and we're hoping people will chip in and make it the transition and get us back there on the research expeditions. And all I can do is try, right? Okay, so let's close the poll down. We'll just call it a night because that was a long show. So I'm not going to do a shout out tonight, unfortunately, because I'm cramped up, actually. So we got 74 votes. Wow. Has Fukushima radioactive fallout, also known as the atomic plague, broken the food chain and caused mass die-offs? If you're not familiar with that, at the beginning of the show, I kind of walked you through what that was all about. You can see the model in the picture up there to kind of help people understand. So that was a great poll. 95% of the people said, yeah, Fukushima has broken the food chain. Thank you, James. My goodness. James donated last night, 124. And we had a few donations. I gave people a shout out to let them know I received it the day before, which puts us at about 230, right? So we raised the rest of the money. We'll order in the idler control valve, because I tried a haywire last night. When I started up today, it won't idle. And we're talking about the ocean, so I can't take a chance, right? We got to do what we got to do. And God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. We'll see everybody on Sunday night's show, because Thursday night, I start on Thursday. So Thursday, Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, and or Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday is the last show of the week. I'll be working all weekend on equipment. We'll get there. We're getting there. It's just unfortunately takes time, right? And that's okay. Hugs for everybody. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. A great weekend, unless there's emergency news. If there is a big story like an earthquake in Japan, Fukushima, I'll be doing another broadcast. But if not, I'll take a couple of days off and just work on all the projects that we got and do what I got with what I got. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. I do read the comments after, and it could be an hour or 2 hours before I finally read it. It always takes me a couple hours after, because it's almost 1 a.m. right now. It's 10 minutes to 1 a.m. my time. But that's the way it works. Let's call it a night. Appreciate everybody participating in the poll. I really do. And if you made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night, folks. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend. Yeah, good night, everybody. We'll see everybody on Sunday. Have a great night and a weekend, folks. Take care.